Okay, good morning. So today I would need you guys to go through and find this paper within the packet that you guys have at home. Hopefully you've already gone through and copied these terms onto these particular figures that you see on this. So as we're moving our way into chordates and eventually into dissections and things like that, we need to go through some terms that are going to describe directions within individuals or organisms. So here you guys are going to see a little running man. You'll also see a dog, and we're going to talk about the terms that relate into different directions within these particular individuals. So the first thing we want to kind of talk about are different planes or different ways that we can divide the body. So you guys are going to see a few here. You guys are going to see what is known as a frontal plane, which is also called a coronal plane. You guys are going to see something called a sagittal plane, and you also see a transverse plane. So three different ways that we can divide this running man. So let's start off with the transverse plane. I think these kind of the easiest one. The transverse plane basically is a cross section. So it's cutting, let's say, the top half from the bottom half of the body. I can go through the ankle, I can go through the knee, I can go through the thigh, I can go through the chest, I can go through the head. If anybody's ever done Body Worlds over at the Franklin Institute, basically they have these different cuts through individuals like this. So you might go through and see a person and they have transverse cuts or transverse planes cutting all the way through this particular individual, and they have those parts all lined up so you can actually see how it changes through each one of those cuts. So once again, transverse plane is just a cross section. So here I did it in the blue line, but like I said, you kids can have it anywhere along the way, all the way through that particular individual. Your frontal plane or coronal plane is going to separate basically your front half from your back half. So it's kind of like you're going through and just slicing yourself right down the middle, and the front and the back half is where we're cutting it through. So it's going to separate also what is known as your ventral side. Ventral is your belly side from your dorsal side. Dorsal is your back side. You guys remember my first year bio where you might have done a dichotomous key that dealt with sharks and talked about the dorsal fin on that particular shark. So if you think about a shark and that dorsal fin, that's the fin that's located along the back side of that particular shark. So once again, any organism, belly side is ventral, backside is dorsal. And why it's important is because as we go through dissections, we may say, oh, lay your organism on dorsal side back, start your cut on the ventral side, and you guys kind of need to know where to start these particular cuts or the area that we're talking about with them. Your sagittal plane. Sagittal plane is if you stand up nice and straight and you basically cut yourself right down the middle, separating your left side from your right side. So an easy way, since you're going to make identical pieces, because left side and right side, bilateral symmetry, they are identical to each other. Sagittal has two identical T's in it. So it's probably the easiest way to remember it. Those two identical T's, we're separating our body into two identical parts. Left side, right side, bilateral symmetry, they should be identical. So those are our three planes. Other terms that you guys should realize. So we just talked about dorsal and ventral. We also have anterior. Anterior is towards the front end as opposed to posterior, which is located more towards the hind end. So how could we see some of these terms? Well, we could say that your ribs are anterior to your heart. Your ribs are more forward. Your heart lies behind your ribs. So we could say that the ribs are anterior to the heart. Proximal and distal. Proximal means located close towards the center of the body. Distal is farthest from center of the body. It doesn't only have to be with legs and hips and knees and things like that. I could do arms. I could say that the nose is distal to the, let's say, shoulder. Or I could say that your foot is distal to your hip. Your hip is proximal to your foot. So which is located closer to the center of the body, which is located farther from the center of the body. Your fingers are distal to your elbow, things like that. Inferior and superior. Think about vena cava, your heart muscles. So you have a superior vena cava, you have an inferior vena cava. Your inferior vena cava is what's taking that blood to and from that lower portion of your body. Superior is taking it to the top portion of your body. So superior is always upmost, inferior is always lower portion of it. I think that's all on this particular guy that you guys see here. So now if we take this little running guy that you have here, and now let's direct him more towards a dog, an organism that's on 4 legs and running with those 4 legs rather than standing straight up on 2 legs. Your terms are pretty much going to be the same. They might look like they're in a different direction because now he's down on all 4 legs. So for instance, that transverse plane where we were cutting him through this way, now we're cutting him through this way. We're doing the same thing. We're cutting a cross section of them. So instead of going through more of this direction of lateral direction here, now we're going more across this way. We're still separating that top portion from the bottom portion, we could say. And once again, this transverse cut can be here, 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 all the way through. Frontal plane, the same thing. Frontal, we said we were separating the dorsal from the ventral side. So we're separating that ventral or belly side from the dorsal side there. We could also have a sagittal plane. It's not added in here. I'll show it on to you guys on another one of the organisms that you guys will see here in a moment. Superior still upmost, inferior still lowest portion, ventral is still belly, dorsal side is still the back side. Another one, we have our anterior end is towards the front, posterior end is towards the rear. We can also add a few more words here. We can talk about cranial. Cranial is referring to the head region. Caudal is referring to the tail region. So we can also say anterior posterior is very similar to cranial and caudal, and they can kind of be used interchangeably there. Down the bottom, you guys have a body cavities man. So this little body cavities man is going to separate, if we think about internal and different cavities that we have, if we're looking at this individual, he's kind of laying or standing to our side here. So we can see a ventral side, which is his belly side, and a dorsal side, which is his back side. If we look at the particular cavities that make up that particular individual, starting at the top, cranial. Well, we just talked about cranial and dog towards the head region as opposed to caudal on the tail region. So cranial is that first little cavity, basically storing the brain there. Your cervical cavity refers to that neck region. If we keep going down, your thoracic cavity, which is where those ribs are located, that's what's protecting your heart and lungs, which is what's going to be in that thoracic cavity. Before we get to that next cavity, which is your abdominal cavity, you guys should realize that you have a muscle there called a diaphragm. So those people who are singers, and you talk about how you can control that diaphragm to help you, sing better or get different tunes. Basically, it moves up and down as you inhale and exhale with that. But that's the muscle that's going to separate the cavities that you see here. And what it's separating is that thoracic cavity, so it's separating your heart and lungs from your abdominal cavity. And not all organisms within the animal kingdom are going to have this particular diaphragm. So if you guys remember separating out things like earthworms and other things like that, they don't all have these different cavities there. So within your abdominal cavity, you would have all your intestines and stomach, liver, all those particular organs like that. And then your last one is going to be that pelvic cavity, and that's more or less where those sex organs are going to be contained. So as we go through the next couple sections with dissection, we might break down each day. Today we'll do thoracic cavity, we'll look at heart and lungs. Today we'll look at abdominal cavity, and we'll look at the digestive organs that are included with that. So we'll be going through a lot of that along the way as well. If you guys flip that over, I'm not going to go through all these particular parts. I do want to look just a little bit at some of the planes that you guys may see on here and some of the terms that we talked about on him. So the first guy that you guys see here, once again, superior is towards the head end, inferior is towards the lower portion of this particular individual. This front picture, since we are doing the back side of the guy here, this is our posterior view. So this posterior view, which is going to be that back side or rear side, we can also say it's his dorsal side. If I was going to do, because we haven't really seen a good one of this, if I was going to go through and do a sagittal plane, and sagittal plane on the front was the one I said it has the 2 T's in it, so it's going to separate out into 2 identical portions, left side and right side, because of bilateral symmetry. So if I was going to do a sagittal plane on this guy, that's where that sagittal plane would be. So by the time that you are done, my left side is identical to my right side. Once again, just like those 2 identical T's that are together in sagittal plane. If I was going to do a transverse plane, I could go through something along this direction here and cut him right in half, cut him right in half across the chest, cut him right in half across the neck. I'm doing that cross section there. If we're looking at the bottom portion there, and once again, you guys should be going through and filling in your particular terms on these individuals. We now have an anterior view, or that front view of him. I can also say this is his ventral view. Some other terms we talked about on the front side. Here's my proximal, closest to the center. Here's my distal, farthest from the center. So I could say my feet are distal from my hips. I could do the same views. I can go through, do a sagittal plane, cut him left side, right side, completely identical. I could do transverse planes and cut him through. So hopefully that will help you guys with these particular terms. If not, let us know.